Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the OECD, welcome to March on Gender. We are celebrating International Women's Day one day early today with what promises to be a very stimulating discussion on transforming negative gender roles in the household. This is part of the Policy Dialogue on Women's Economic Empowerment. And we're fortunate to have with us two change makers, champions of the cause, who will present us with two pioneering initiatives to tackle discriminatory gender norms in the household. Poonam Muttreja, you're the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India, and Tim Shant, you're the Vice President of Advocacy and Partnerships for Promundo. So welcome to both of you, and to set the scene, let me invite none other than our own house champion of the cause, Gabriela Ramos, Chief of Staff and Sherpa.
Thank you so much, and I think you should move, because you're spread around and... No, you don't want to. Okay. Thank you so much, and great to be here with you in this March on Gender. It's a marathon, and thank you, Mario Pezzini, the director, and the deputy are here. I think that the topic you choose to for this discussion, it's a very interesting one, because it's really trying to get a very good knowledge with these very well-known champions on what innovative practices can help us to build up a much more equal world for women. At the OECD, I don't know if you are aware, we launched the Gender Initiative, but actually it's interesting because gender issues in the OECD started long ago. When we launched the Gender Initiative in 2010, we started looking around what we have done before in previous years, and we found a recommendation of 1980, which was for gender equality, gender economic empowerment, which was exactly the same kind of things that we talk, and I'm probably getting old, but it was exactly the same topics. The only difference is that this recommendation was approved by the Committee of Manpower. At least it's not the Manpower now, it's a Committee of Social Affairs, so we have made some progress. And we have been pushing this agenda in the G20, we have been pushing this agenda in all of our OECD countries, but also in the Development Center, and with the work that we do with so many developing countries, we have made a lot of progress, and we are working very closely to fulfill also on the SDGs. And I have to say that if we are frustrated with the fact that we don't have a single country that has reached gender equality among OECD countries, which are the most advanced, we are almost despair when we look at the landscape of developing countries. Because it's not only the question of gender stereotyping or biases or social norms that prevent women to fulfill their full potential, as it happened in some OECD countries, but it's even legal frameworks that are discriminating, that are kind of social practices that are unacceptable, and hurdles that are really putting a woman in a very, very backward position. And just to name something, when we developed the gender strategy in the OECD, it was about education, empowerment, and education, entrepreneurship, and employment. And then we went into public service. And then we developed the CG, which is a fantastic database regarding social institutions. But we never really thought about the issue of violence against women. And this is something that all of our countries are starting to say we need to tackle it, because at least 1 out of 3 girls have suffered violence. But this is way higher in developing countries. And what is striking also in many developing countries is that it's even justified by women. And we were, Colette Morris, who is my advisor, was astonished to see that 80% of women in Afghanistan justified violence. And I guess it's the same in my country, in Mexico. And many other countries, people just think that it's just normal. And that is something we really need to change, because it comes to the deeper sense of human dignity. Now, there are issues around legal loopholes, where in 28 developing countries, rape is often excused if the victims marry the perpetrators, and I cannot think of any other horror outcome like that, no? So you even need to marry the aggressor. In Guatemala, 40% of violence survivors hide the injuries due to lack of trust in institutions. This is another angle that is very worrisome. And you know, there is a beautiful video, I don't know if you have seen it, where a man comes to the prosecutor and he says, my car has been stolen. And then a policewoman enters into the room and she says, and what were you dressing? How did you look? It's like, well, that's the justice system for our girls, because there's always something that you did. Think about what you did, and that's a very funny and tragic kind of video, but it shows how much we need to build up institutions that are gender sensitive and that are really trying to address issues, because then girls or women that are facing these violent situations will never go to the institutions that are needed to be addressing these problems. There are, of course, questions of slavery and exploitation. In 2 more weeks, we will be joining Kailash Satyarthi, who is this Nobel Prize, who is saving children from slavery. And the worst cases, I mean, child slavery is awful all the way up. But what he says is that for girls, exploitation and sexual exploitation is just the worst case ever. So these are the kind of things that we are trying to address, and we're very happy that you put it in the agenda. And there it comes, it's about empowerment, it's about economic empowerment, and it's, of course, the kind of role models and distribution of tasks that we have in the household, and that is related to this event that is preventing women to fulfill their full potential, because we're usually the ones that perform the unpaid work. And we call it the unpaid work. That's a very nice technical term, because before we used to ask women, what do you do? And if you have a house, well, she would say, nothing, no? You don't work? No, I don't work. Oh my God, housewives is huge, very demanding job. So they work. And in Mujeres in Mexico, for example, even the narrative, they are changing it, because we used to say the ninis, no, not in employment, not working, not studying. And in Mujeres said, no, you cannot say that they're not working. You should say that they're not in the labor market or in the formal jobs, but they work. Because this is the starting point to try to get the real value of the work that women do. And this is something that we are also doing at the OECD to try to assess and quantify how much we're doing it for the G7, at least, because of course they have very advanced systems to try to measure it, but how much the non-paid work or the work related to households, chores and children are really contributing to the economy. We know that women spend more time in paid and unpaid care and combined than men. On average in the OECD, women spend 1.5 hours per day more than men on family issues or on household issues. In my country is 4 hours, and I'm always, we say these indicators like that, 4 hours, yeah, 4 hours, women. Can you imagine 4 hours of your day, each one of you, 4 hours a day more work if you're a Mexican woman? And I can say it because I'm Mexican. I don't do it, sorry, but the fact is that it's just too much, and then we wonder why women don't have the space or the capacity to invest more in the workplace and to aspire to more demanding tasks in the workplace, and therefore it's something we need to be also addressed. The OECD Social Institutions and Gender Index of CG that I mentioned finds that higher inequalities and unpaid care work between women and men are closely linked to larger gender gaps in labor force participation and wages. In Bangladesh, for example, women spend almost 3 times longer on unpaid care work than men, and in contrast, men are almost 3 times as likely to participate in the labor force. And of course, this fits into other aspects of women's lives. If they are not economically empowered, they are not economically independent and have fewer rights and protections and have, of course, worse outcomes for life. So we need to keep documenting what are the contribution of women on unpaid work and try to address entrenched gender norms, which are the main impediment for gender equality. And these norms and traditional roles put pressure on women to be the sole caregivers of families, whether it's children or elderly parents. And that's why we always, of course, go for gender solutions, but we also go for family-friendly solutions. And if you have labor markets that are so long hours and so demanding, of course you're not going to have any family balance. And of course it's going to be impossible to have these kind of conditions that would allow women to enter in a much more softer way into the labor market. But then, of course, we have the traditional roles and the pressure that women faces in terms of what they are expected to do. And we have been discussing that in terms of what professions, what disciplines, the STEM, that they don't really go, and why aren't they not more represented in the higher levels of management or higher levels of government or many other institutions. We found that there are approaches to address unpaid care work, and there are 3 R's. And this is interesting because I used to work with the Japanese G7, and the 3 R's was recycle, reuse, or something with the environment. Now we have the 3 R's for gender equality, which I love, which is recognize, reduce, and redistribute. I would start with redistribute, you know, but recognizing unpaid care work means looking past traditional measures on economic well-being, such as income and wealth, to understand the full value of women's economic and social contribution. The OECD has been looking at how individuals allocate their time, and we have started to measure the value of unpaid work, as I said, in GDP and their impact in G7 countries, and we hope we will be able to expand this work with more economies, or at least to have some proxies to look at it. Second, the OECD countries have made important advances in reducing the difficult and time-consuming tasks associated with unpaid care work, for example, through investment in infrastructure. And this is important because this is also related to the gender budgeting task or toolkit that we're trying to develop, because you invest in infrastructure, in transport infrastructure, but if you don't integrate the gender lens, then sometimes you are even against mobility of women or their possibilities to having a close school to the work and easy ways to go, and also consider safety and constraints of women, which are the ones that are in charge of the family, but also in developing countries who are in charge of looking for food, looking for water, and spending a lot of time on those issues. Members of the DAC are also committed to supporting developing countries through the development cooperation. In 2015, over $26 billion in aids was committed to economic infrastructure and services, but I have to say that those commitments are not yet integrated within the gender lens. It's just the amount, and that's it. We need to get it closer into the gender equality agenda. Now, many countries have made policy reforms to promote a more gender-balanced sharing of caring responsibilities. In the OECD Pursuit of Gender Equality report shows that around 2/3 of OECD countries now offer paid paternity leave. And this is interesting because this is the starting point, because if you are going to be the one caring for the kids, at least in the labor market, we should avoid discriminating of who is going to take care of what. The interesting thing is that it's not enough to have dual parental leave, you need to take it. And Korea has made, for example, fantastic progress. They have the most generous package, but nobody takes it. So this is again linked to a more needed comprehensive approach to move into a more balanced world. The CG country study of Burkina Faso showed that 70% of women and men do not believe that unpaid care work should be shared equally, even if both members of the couple work. So this is, again, not only about the institution, not only about legal frameworks, but it's also about transforming social norms, stereotyping, biases, and creative thinking. And I hope we're going to learn from you in terms of the innovations that you have advanced. But we need to have to break the mold and move to these more empowering stories. And I have here a quote for Poonam Muttreja. You're going to be speaking shortly about soap operas, because soap operas are very influential, and you will probably have heard this from me before, but I was invited to the establishment of the equality system in Mexico, and the president was there, and I was talking about all the things that Mexico would the OECD recommend them to do. And at some point I said, but you should stop the soap operas because they are reproducing this terrible stereotyping and awful things that they project about the roles of women and the meaning. And then I go back and sit in my place, and a lady that was next to me said, you did that on purpose. And I'm like, what? To talk about soap operas and the damage to... Well, yeah, because I think they're pretty bad. And he said, did you remember that the wife of the president is a soap opera actress? I said, well, I have to stand with what I said, but the reality is that it's true. They just reproduce very strange stereotypes. And then, of course, the role of media. This is another very important aspect. Not only in terms of the gender bias, like normal gender bias, the fact that only 23% of the main characters are women in all the film industry, the fact that you don't have film directors, that you don't have the leading roles are always male in any industry, but this is the case in the media, but also the pressure that they put on these gender roles. And I have to say that also in our education work, we released the PISA for well-being, and we found that girls express 10 points below of life satisfaction at age 15, and that the social networks are a source of great stress and great pressure in terms of conforming to certain images. And the fact is that if we care about bullying in schools for boys and girls, the fact is that bullying for girls is always related to their image. And this is very, very intrinsic in human values, and it's terrible because it's very damaging. So that's another angle. We're very proud that we launched the Policy Dialogue on Women Economic Empowerment initiative that is looking at this question of unpaid work. We had the first policy dialogue in January and bringing together many stakeholders. And we have already learned some solutions to unpaid work that, of course, need to be very targeted to the local context. It needs to move for greater sensitization efforts in the communities. It needs to go for literacy for women. And it needs to be thought not only as an economic matter, but also the moral imperative to recognize the efforts of people. So today we will be talking about developing countries. We're looking forward to the presentation to Madame Muttreja from the Population Foundation, but also Tim Shan from Pomundo, who I was in Brazil last week, so you founded this initiative 20 years ago. And then it's very interesting because you are actually, the more we talk about female, we are convinced that this is an agenda about men. And so it's also about educating boys, it's also about changing the role models. And we would like to hear from you on this question of what it means to be a man, which is very interesting. So over to you. I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for organizing this, and thank all of you for coming.
Merci, Gabriela. Thank you very much. Poonam, I was fortunate enough to hear you talk about your initiative some months ago in the OECD, and I'm extremely happy that you came back today to share it with this audience. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
So it is indeed a privilege to be back at OECD. And Gabriela, after your very comprehensive and inspiring speech, hard act to follow, but I will. I'm particularly excited that OECD is looking at and playing a leadership role on looking at unpaid work, because I believe unpaid work and caregiving roles of women is the biggest impediment for women in many ways, for their health, for their economic future, for their careers, and it actually goes across poor women and rich women and well-educated women and literate women. So congratulations to all of you who are working on that. I'm going to start with a clip from our serial, the show that I'm going to talk about. The camera never lies.
गांधी जी कहा करते थे अर्जुन कि इस देश की आत्मा इसके गांव में बसती है।
उसका मर्द कमलेश चौधरी आदमी नहीं है, राक्षस है राक्षस। शादी करके आप उसकी जिंदगी को सूली पर चढ़ाना चाहते हैं?
बच्चों के बीच में कम से कम 3 साल का अंतर होना बहुत जरूरी है।
कॉन्डम के अलावा और भी बहुत सारे उपाय हैं, जैसे कि गोलियां हैं, कॉपर्टी है।
ये नशे का असर है, ड्रग्स का बहुत हैवी डोज है।
अब अगर आपने एक और बार अपनी बीवी पर हाथ उठाया ना, तो नतीजा अच्छा नहीं होगा।
The series continues to inspire young women to assert themselves and believe that they are capable of achieving anything.
आपने हमारी जबरदस्ती शादी की। हम तो पढ़ना लिखना चाहते थे।
क्या करेगी पढ़ लिख कर? प्रधानमंत्री बनेगी?
हाँ, बनूंगी मैं प्रधानमंत्री।
Oh, that's all. No, there's more. So, I've been working in the development sector and on women's rights and women's economic empowerment and a range of issues for the last 4 decades. Yes, that dates me. I'm older than I look. And I found while I got a lot of satisfaction for my work, but it was very frustrating because the women's movement is about taking 2 steps backward and 1.5 steps, 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps backward. And that half step we took, we are maintaining to keep the gains. What is the biggest stumbling factor? Gabriella referred to it, the social norms. Patriarchy is something that not just men, it permeates to women. And as you said, 80% women in Afghanistan believe it is legitimate for their husband to beat them. Same in India, it's 60%, at least in our data when we did the baseline. So I had been looking for ways to change social norms, and I knew that IEC traditionally, that we've all invested lots of dollars in, didn't work. So 5 years ago, I came across something called education entertainment, which the data showed had the potential to make quick and huge changes. Also, if you maintain the momentum, it's not that one show can change. It takes a good 10 years, and we had examples from South Africa, the Soul City, Mexico, where the favelas have made an impact on reducing violence, Brazil, where, again, there have been entertainment education programs that have brought down fertility rates from 7 to 4 in a period of 5 years. So I went on this journey with the Bollywood director and one of the world's leading entertainment education gurus, Professor Arvind Singhal, who's in Texas University, and we studied what had worked globally for a year. We not only studied what had worked, but we studied what didn't work. And then we came out with a program which DFID funded called a woman can achieve anything. In Hindi, it's Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon. And our protagonist is Dr. Sneha, who is a doctor, a successful doctor in a city, and who moves to a village to begin a new life with communities. One of our other characters is Purab, who is the brother of Sneha, held very patriarchal mindsets, unmindful of his wife's health. He beat his wife, he didn't practice family planning, and unmindful totally of the responsibility and the need of the family. What did we do with him? We transformed him. Where his wife is about to die, we don't kill her, and her health deteriorates and she faces a miscarriage. We don't do Purab changed. And I want to tell you, when we did our pilot, when we tested a pilot, every woman said, by the way, he was an alcoholic. Now you're seeing a reformed Purab with tears in his eyes. Purab, every woman said, there is a relative of mine like Purab. She didn't say, my son is like Purab. every young man who saw the pilot said, my friend is like Poorab. So there are many Poorabs in our life who we have to transform. And we did transform him, and he greatly inspired people. And then there is the aunt. The aunt who we call Buaji, who again, it is the older women who are responsible for ensuring that men and women, young men and women, practice patriarchy. So we transformed her in the serial. So you start with the normal characters. And how did we start with the normal characters? I'll tell you later. She realizes through a game show we did with her and confessed to her family that the role she was playing was wrong, which is practicing patriarchy. And then we have another character who's a misguided young man called Raghu. He's a victim of peer pressure, clearly, and uses and indulges in substance abuse and tries to play the role of a male decision maker in his house, too. Again, we transformed him after he faced arrest, repents being arrested, and repents indulging in sexual abuse. So how did we use these characters and many more to change social norms? The storyline builds on strong characters who challenge social norms and gender norms while transforming their communities. And these are the characters I was showing you. And then we used the positive deviance approach. We did not make these stories sitting in our office or our boardroom. These stories are positive deviant case studies. We did 80 case studies, and we amplified some of them with the entertainment and education. With the result that people in the community found it easy to change because it's doable. The solutions we showed are doable. The parasocial interaction was based on characters in the serial, which, as I said, emerged from real life stories. And this enabled the viewers to really relate to them and not just view them as good or bad or transformative characters. We chose to work with Feroz Abbas Khan, who's from Bollywood and comes with huge sensitivity to gender issues. And he studied, as I said earlier, Feroz Khan spent a year studying the art of doing entertainment education. So what we have is a 360-degree approach where we have broadcast in 12 regional languages after the first show because the first show was so successful. And we went on air in India's national broadcast television, which is called Doordarshan, which has 80% penetration in India and 30% viewership. Think of 1.3 billion people and the numbers. We used the community media. We were on radio stations. Oh, by the way, we were also on the government 216 radio stations across the country. Community outreach, we worked with civil society organizations forming Seha clubs, which I will say was a mistake because going to season 3, we are going to form men's clubs. And I don't only say that inspired by the great work Pramindo has done, but we were inspired by this group of men in a very remote part of India in UP who decided to put together a men's group and took a vow they will not beat their wives, inspired by our serial, that they would practice family planning and that they would learn to cook. A rural man in India saying he would learn to cook, and a group of men is more than transformation. It's almost a revolution if that could happen. So we had community outreach with women's clubs, which we are going to change and work more with the men along with the women. And then we use the digital social media. In fact, I want to tell you about, Gabriella's not here, but Gabriella mentioned that that soap operas have created very regressive social norms and perpetuated, in fact, worse than perpetuation, they've created new regressive social norms. One of the television stations, not to be mentioned, a private commercial station in India, had contributed significantly to regressive social norms for women. For instance, they always projected a working woman as a woman who had one foot in her boss's bed and who was always stabbing the other colleagues. And this television program has bought the rights of our digital media. We are not on, as a result, we are no more on digital media because they bought our rights. And I kept thinking, why are they doing it? So I started snooping around and doing my intelligence, and I found that they've done it to change their image, because their image is regressive soap, television soaps. So that I considered one of our biggest victories. The interactive voice response system, which is like a Facebook for the poor. At the end of every episode, there's a missed call, there's a telephone number, you call and you get a missed call, and we call back automatically, and people can leave stories, ask questions, and we thought we'll receive 250 calls, we were told, every episode. On the first day, within 2 hours, we received 7,000 phone calls and our IVRS collapsed. So we had to reboot it. And total, we've received 1.7 million phone calls, which have been evaluated, and I'd be very happy to share the evaluation. So we evaluated not only the IVRS system, but the IVRS gave us real-time feedback from the community on how to change or improve and monitor our programming. So when we did the impact evaluation, which was an external evaluation, this is what we found. This is 52 episodes. I'm only talking about season 1. Now we are into preparing for season 3, and we had a season 2 after season 1. So in season 1, only 2% men said they understood the adverse consequences of early marriage, and after the 52 episode, 31% men understood the consequences. Before the show, 47% men and women knew about family planning, but after 52 episodes, 59% men and women knew about family planning. And the most important one, men and women who found domestic violence acceptable came down from before the show at 66% to 44%. So when I talked about quick transformative changes, this is a huge example, and I'm talking about men and women. And with a name like Main Kuch Bhi, I, a woman, can achieve anything, what do you think was the percentage of men who watched our show? Anybody? 20. It was 48%. And I think it was partly to do with these transformative characters, plus one character, I'm sorry I didn't show, is the father of Dr. Sneha, who has 3 daughters. He's a school teacher, and who actually taught his daughters, you can achieve anything, and that's why Sneha is what she is. So positive characters. And so 48% were men, and 52% were women. Season 2, the percentage of respondent, 62% viewers continue watching season 2. At least 50% said that they got information on family planning that was exclusive, information they'd never heard before. And more than 75% women and 85% men watched the show together. It's not just the fact that 48% men watched the show, but they watched it together, and it led to conversations on these very difficult issues between the men and the women. The IVRS, as I said, was also evaluated. We had a total of 1.7 million phone calls, but 400,000 of them across 29 states were unique callers, which means they called again and again. and 67% young people participated in the IVRS, and 85% people, when they were asked to recall what they remembered social themes, pro-social themes. So what is the lesson? Okay, so this is a quote from Professor Arvind Singhal, who was our guide, who I said is Global Authority on Entertainment Education. And he says, if you want to understand a culture, listen to their stories. If you want to change the culture, then change its stories, which is what we did. And the lessons were that you need to root the stories in the cultural context of the people. It cannot be any other way. It hasn't worked. There is enough global evidence to show it doesn't work. And that is what led to a large-scale acceptance of our serial. I was so nervous when we designed the serial. It's a lot of money. Every dollar of every taxpayer is as valuable to me, whether it's from Britain. This was DFID. DFID funded us, or American, or British, or any country. So we were really nervous investing so much money. And the storyline emerges from, as I said earlier, I said 80 positive deviant studies, but it's 90. Sorry, I'm minus 10. And the inclusion of very simple local solutions is what worked. Very complicated solutions do not work. And, oh, sorry. So,
ये एक दिन होगा औरतों की मर्जी का दिन। इस दिन औरतें अपनी मर्जी का
It couldn't be so short. Can you manipulate yourself? Can you take care from there? This is about a day that women spent. We created a day in the life of our serial where women, it was called Women's Choice Day, where women did what they wanted and the men supported the household. You have to put it into practice. Can we get that clip? The last clip, it couldn't be so short.
ये एक दिन होगा औरतों की मर्जी का दिन। इस दिन औरतें अपनी मर्जी का सब कुछ करेंगी। बाहर घूमने जाएंगी, सिनेमा देखेंगी और मर्द घर संभालेंगे, बच्चों की देख-रेख करेंगे, खाना पकाएंगे।
और उन्होंने मुझे बोला कि वो आपकी खाना बनाने में, बच्चों को संभालने में, सब चीजों में मदद करते हैं।
जैसे बच्चे रो रहे थे तो मतलब उन्हें खिलाती हूँ और मसाला भी पीस देती हूँ।
मसाला भी पीस देते हैं? आता भी है उनको मसाला पीसना?
हाँ, आता है। गर्मियों में हम समस्या हो जाती पवनी की।
हाँ।
दूर लेने जाते हैं तो हम लोग नहीं जाते हैं, तो फिर पवनी लोग भरवा देंगे।
पानी तक भरवा देते हैं, क्या बात है।
हम लोग ना कोई नई टीम बनाने की कोशिश नहीं कर रहे हैं, एक ठहरे हुए तालाब में समंदर की लहर क्रिएट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। इस सोए हुए गांव को एक लहर की जरूरत है।
हम अपनी शान के लिए नहीं खेल रहे हैं, अपने स्वाभिमान के लिए खेल रहे हैं।
कभी मैं जागा सपना, कभी मैं खोया सा सच, कभी मैं साथी सबकी, कभी मैं अपना ही रब, रंगों की खुशबू को कोख में भर सकती हूँ, एक नई जान को सांसों में भर सकती हूँ। मैं ये भी, मैं वो भी, मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ, मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ, मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ।
That is our theme song, and it's specially written for you, Bethel, as you have the baby, and having a baby is a huge achievement for every woman, and congratulations to you. And we say that in our song. When we were discussing this program, we decided there's going to be some dance and some singing. I've done my bit. The men will dance. I've done the singing and showed you the singing. But at the end of this, I'd just like to say that a very nervous troupe that made this serial, now the figure is reach has been, cumulative reach through radio and television has been 400,000 million. It's been translated into 14 regional languages, and it has been shown 3 times. And as we waited for season 3, Doordarshan could not resist the demand from the people to re-show it. So that was why it was shown 3 times, and we are on 240 radio stations. And so with that, we are very proud that we've got the formula right, but I can assure you we didn't get it right without the help and support of many, many people who were trailblazers, and learning from others and what works really does work is the final lesson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Poonam. This is really exciting. I'm sure there's going to be many questions and remarks for you. But before we turn to questions and answers, it's going to be the turn of Tim Shen, Vice President in Advocacy and Partnerships of Promundo. You are sharing your experience with men to promote caregiving and active fatherhood as an entry point to encourage equitable gender roles, prevent violence against women, and contribute to positive maternal and child health outcomes. Before you tell us about it, we'll watch a little more video.
Minha mãe, uma vez, quando ele bateu na porta, minha mãe abriu, ele estava alcoolizado, estava bêbado, e deu um soco. Tinha que mostrar que ele era homem.
بمجتمعنا بطبيعة الحال الرجل هو رأس المرأة، يعني هي الفكرة اللي موجودة، والمرأة هي تابعة للرجل.
mbese abanza kuvuga ati niba umwohereje ku ishuri kikaba ikindi kibazo, numva cya gikomere cyanjye kirazamutse.
පිරිමියාය මේම තමයි ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ ගෑනුන්ගේ වැඩ කරන්න කොහොමත් අකමැත්තේනේ. ඒ වුණාට මට මම අම්බ කරලා දෙනවා. එයා ගෙදර ඉඳලා කරනවා. ඒ ඔක්කොම එයා බලාගයි.
Eu ficava dentro do meu quarto, digamos assim, trancado. Não, isso aqui ninguém mexe. A partir daquele momento ali, eu vendo a história de cada um, aquilo ali me serviu para que eu pudesse ser curado daquilo.
මට ඉස්සරලාම පොඩ්ඩක් ලැජ්ජ වුණා. මේ මාස 3ෙම ගියා වගේ. වෙන එකක් මගේ තුල එඟට ආවා වගේ දැනුණා.
وبنتعاون مع بعضنا. وقتها هي بتكون أنا عندي شغل هي بتهتم أكتر، وقتها هي بتكون عندها شغل كمان أنا بهتم.
umukobwa we yimubuhe buryo nyamara n'umukobwa wanjye nkumva ni ibintu nawe bimushimye kuba yarahindutse bifite umusaruro ushimishije.
Essa ferramenta é poderosa diante de uma comunidade de transformação. Ela não vem de um monte, ela vem pingo, 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 então torna aquele rio forte.
Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here this afternoon. I want to talk about the transformational effect of men's caregiving to shift the burden of care on women within the household, to challenge stereotypes and to promote women's economic empowerment. we're here today celebrating International Women's Day, and I think we can recognize significant advances that we've seen globally around gender equality. Nevertheless, our research shows, as was already talked about earlier by Gabriella and others, that women still spend 3 times more every day doing caregiving and domestic work than men do. We have seen a transformation in men's greater caregiving around this world, and you can see that every day. But we have a long way to go to really truly achieve gender equality and to achieve the types of women's empowerment that we all want to see. And if we think about the Me Too moment, which has brought to the fore the reality of inequalities in this world and has highlighted to many of us things that those in the room already know around the challenges that women face to reach their full potential. The Me Too moment is an important time to hold men to account, to call out to men, to call them out. But it's also an important moment to call men in and to think about what a new form of manhood could look like, how we could engage men more in caregiving and unpaid work for the benefit of everyone. I want to talk with you about the benefits of unpaid work for women and women's economic empowerment, for children, for men themselves, for a more gender equitable world, and what are some of the solutions that we are using to achieve that. The film was part of our global Men Care campaign, a global fatherhood campaign now in 45 countries, half of the OECD member states. We recognize that 4 out of 5 men in their life will be a father. That fatherhood is an important transformational moment to be able to engage men. And so we use research, we undertake targeted advocacy, we produce media campaigns such as you see here, and we also develop the evidence base around how to do this work, how we can transform the roles of men and women for the benefit of everyone. A central part of what we seek to do is for men to do 50% of the unpaid work that we've been talking about globally. No single country today has reached that commitment, and through our work, we're seeking to do so. So why is men's unpaid care involvement so critically important? I want to talk about why it's important, firstly, for women and women's economic empowerment. The single biggest barrier to women's access to the workplace is the unequal distribution of domestic tasks and unpaid care. We know through the International Labour Organization that women earn on average 10 to 30% less than men do. The International Labour Organization said it will take 75 years at the current rate of progress to reduce that gap between men and women's care. I don't have 75 years to wait. I'm sure you don't have 75 years to wait. And we do know that men's unpaid care can be transformational in reducing the time that women have to spend on these tasks and unlocking their potential to access the workplace, to address this unequal balance in pay. And also to think about how women not only access the workplace, but do so in greater numbers and also in positions of leadership and power. And we often only focus on women's ability to access work. But what we don't think about often is how the unequal gender norms within the home have a direct impact on women's ability to be at the table when decisions are made, to be there when promotions are decided, to be there when we think about the leadership that we want in societies. I'm sure you're all very familiar with images such as this of women having to multitask. And we have seen and we can celebrate the significant increase in women's access to paid employment. But we also know, and Gabriella mentioned this at the beginning, that now women are doing more paid and unpaid work than men are doing in total. Are we wanting to create a new generation of superwomen? Or can we believe that through engaging men in unpaid care, that can not only enable women to better access the workplace, but can can reduce the overall time women have to spend on the multiple tasks that they have, enable them to have more leisure time, more free time, and reduce their stress. We believe that that's possible. And we believe that men doing more of the unpaid care and reducing the distribution is central to women's economic empowerment. We also know that fatherhood and men's involvement in unpaid care is important for children. We see research showing us that the involvement of fathers is important for children's intellectual development, for their emotional development, for their social development, for their behavioral development. We see that children who have involved fathers do better often in school-related outcomes. They are less depressed. They tend to be more economically successful. And we also know, as you can see from this beautiful image, that the emotional connection that a father can have with their child, especially if at a young age, can create a cycle of caregiving throughout the whole of this child's life. So men's caregiving matters for children. Men's caregiving also matters for men themselves. Our research, particularly our International Men and Gender Equality Survey that we've now undertaken in over 36 countries, looking at what's up with men around gender equality and gender norms, we consistently find that men say they would like to be more involved in the lives of their children. They would like to be more involved in unpaid care if it weren't for the barriers for them to do so. And we know that men's caregiving is good for men's mental health, it's good for men's broader overall happiness, it's good for their sexual health. Women of partners of involved men or men of partners of involved men report consistently greater happiness and contentment when their partner is more involved. Women, as we often say to guys, listen up, women also say they have happier sex lives or more content sex lives when their partner is involved. So guys, it's good for your sex life as well as it's good for women and women's empowerment. And I know myself, and this is a picture of my son Thomas, 2-year-old, and myself, that at the end of a stressful and busy day, as many of us experience, being able to sit down with Thomas and spend time with him. This is Thomas teaching me how to read. He's got a long way to go, but he's doing his best. That it's a hugely influential and important grounding moment for me to really focus on him, but also to focus on what's most important in life. And lastly, we know that men's caregiving is important for gender equality. Our research consistently shows that it creates an intergenerational cycle of caregiving. Men who witness their fathers or male caregivers being more involved in domestic and unpaid care work are 1.5 times more likely themselves to then be involved in care work in later life. So caregiving leads to caregiving. We also know that male caregivers can model what it is to be a gender equitable son and can support daughters to be empowered and autonomous. And they can model the caregiving within the home, whatever the caregiving arrangement between men and women or men and men or women and women, that the involvement of a male caregiver in that space can model what it is to be more equitable, for what it looks like for intimate partners to be more supportive of each other. And we also know that men's caregiving and involvement in unpaid care is a protective factor for children experiencing and witnessing violence and abuse. So men's caregiving matters for women and women's economic empowerment. It matters for children and their development. It matters for men. It matters for a gender equitable world. What we're not saying is men somehow provide a unique or special or important caregiving role that women don't do. We must celebrate the women in this room who day in, day out do the caregiving that they do. But what it is about saying is men's caregiving is important for all of us. All types of caregivers should be involved in all types of caregiving. We see new research highlighting just how men themselves are also hardwired for care. We see research showing that men have the same hormonal response and brain activity that women do when exposed closely with children. So it's about saying we need to celebrate everyone's potential to be a caregiver, everyone's potential to love and be engaged in the lives of others. It's about saying we need to celebrate a different type of world, where through a greater focus on redistributing unpaid work between men and women, we can improve women's economic empowerment. But how do we get there? Recognizing that this is important, a central question for us throughout much of our work has been, how do we reduce the burden on women? How do we redistribute care work? How do we address the barriers to achieving what we want to achieve? How do we overcome those challenges? What works to do so? And within the Men Care campaign, we've been seeking to answer that question. I am the global co-coordinator of this campaign, which is a great privilege. And in particular, through the production of our State of the World's Fathers report, first in 2015, then in 2017, you can see the cover here, where we had access to time use data, and now working on a 2019 report. We've been able to identify the global evidence on this issue, and also to say what works and what are the solutions to engaging men more in unpaid care work and domestic tasks. And so I want to share with you a number of solutions that we are putting into practice. These solutions don't take 75 years. We know, and Poonam was talking also about this, we can make these changes quickly if we invest and believe that it's possible to do so. So firstly, we need to shift social and gender norms around unpaid care. This is the central thing that you've been hearing from the panel today. We need to change the world where unpaid care is seen as some kind of squishy thing that's done by women, to a world where everybody is understood to be a caregiver, where we see unpaid care as being just as important, the unpaid work as important as the paid work. We need to begin early with young people, with boys and with girls, around changing these norms on unpaid care. And that's central to much of the work that we do, particularly our interventions, including through randomized control trials, engaging with young people to shift these norms. And through programs with youth around the world, we've been able to do so, to engage boys and girls around their understanding of what it means to be a man, what does it mean to be a girl, and how can we change their understanding of the roles that men and women play and unlock everyone's potential, to imagine a different world with different roles between us. So addressing these gender norms is central, and it's not just about the education system, although that is critically important. It's about our institutions, it's about our workplaces, our corporations, our governments, how throughout all of our structures in society can we shift these social norms. And only when we do that can we really achieve some of the benefits that we've been talking about on this panel. So changing social norms is critically important. But it's not just about individual men and individual women. We also need to use policy levers. Something that the Men Care campaign particularly advocates on, and we've seen success around, is shifting parental leave. We have something called the Men Care Parental Leave Platform, which gives 10 key points around what works for effective parental leave, including what makes men take the leave as a particular challenge that we have, as Gabrielle mentioned. Parental leave is the single biggest policy lever that we can use to change fundamentally these norms that we're talking about. We've seen dramatic changes within the sharing of unpaid work between men and women thanks to parental leave. And as I say, we know what makes it work. In particular, parental leave has to be non-transferable. There has to be an element of take it or leave it for men. It needs to be sufficiently paid, and it needs to be sufficient in the length of period that's offered. And this is a slide showing data from Iceland, which is an excellent example of just that. So if you look at 2000, where the graph starts to steeply increase, that's when Iceland introduced a take it or leave it element for dads. And then when you look at the 3 lines, firstly, when parental leave was 1 month, then when it was 2 months, then when it was 3 months, we can see again just how much that led to significant increases in men's uptake of parental leave. So we need to use these policy levers, but we need to do it thoughtfully, and we need to do it in ways that we know work. And if you think about other OECD countries where you don't have a particular element of take it or leave it for dads, such as Denmark, for example, we see only 24% uptake. The UK, my own home country, has the same challenge around uptake amongst men because of the fact that they don't have an element where men have to take it or they'll lose it. So we know what works for parental leave, but we haven't seen sufficient global progress on this issue. Almost every country in the world has maternity leave. Our analysis shows only 92 countries globally have some form of parental leave. And as your analysis at OECD shows, often that leave isn't sufficiently well paid, isn't non-transferable in particular components, and as a result, isn't sufficiently taken up by men. So let's use the lever that we have and we know works through parental leave. And MenCare, as I say, has been specifically advocating successfully on this issue, and we've had recent successes in South Africa in particular, also in the Netherlands and in Spain, that we can celebrate around greater progress on this issue. As we think about policy, it's also really important that we think about the lowest income individuals and families, and that's really where we can learn a lot from the work of Poonam and our colleagues. It's not just about parental leave, it's also about what are the other income supports that enable men and women to access the time saving and additional resources that they need. And especially childcare. We know that many men and women around the work in the informal sector where they don't have the benefit of access to formal mechanisms such as parental leave. And we can see through childcare, and this is a graph showing the difference around the proportion of women who are wage earners in countries where there is state-subsidized childcare versus countries where there is not. And you can see that in countries where there is childcare subsidized or publicly provided, women are more than twice as likely to be wage earners than not. So it's really critically important that we focus on income supports for the poorest and also think about the different type of workplace that we want to live in and work in. How do we create workplaces that are more flexible and understanding for all types of caregivers in all their varieties? So policy plays a key role. But we also need to give men the skills to do this work. Globally, there are a significant number of programs for mothers, but there are far fewer programs that specifically work with fathers and male caregivers to give them the skills to be positive, non-violent, and supportive caregivers. So we've been building the evidence base around how do you undertake and implement a father-centered program working with men and with women, expectant parents, to give men and their partners the skills to be able to be more involved in the lives of their children. And we've seen significant impact in this work. This slide shows a picture of a randomized control trial project initiative in Rwanda, where through this intervention, our Program P, we've been able to redistribute care work between men and women, to reduce men's use of violence within intimate partner relationships, to reduce men's use of violence against children, but also to nudge men along to be more involved in antenatal care and to be more involved in family planning. So we need to scale up and support these initiatives and programming for dads. We need to give men the skills and confidence to be able to be more involved caregivers. And we need to hold men to account and make sure that they participate in these programs and use affirmative action so they do so. And we can learn a lot from Sweden and other countries where they've scaled up more or less universal access to their Papa's clubs. An important point around this program for OECD is that this was part of a women's economic empowerment initiative, or this work in Rwanda. And it wasn't possible for women to be able to have the full benefits of that program had it not been for the fact that men took up some of the unpaid care work in the home. So as we think about how we have successful women's empowerment initiatives, we must also focus on the very unequal division of labour within the home that often prevents women from even accessing these programs. As we think about scale up, we also must engage the health sector, and in particular antenatal care. And we've had successes in Brazil, where we were founded 20 years ago, engaging around protocols for antenatal care to build the skills of health providers and the broader health system and institutions to be able to work with men as well as women through antenatal care visits and throughout the pregnancy and beyond. And we've seen dramatic increases in men's involvement in ANC as a result. And as mentioned, this is a transformational moment in which we can engage fathers and male caregivers early for the future benefits of their children, for this will lead to a lifelong involvement in caregiving. So it's not just about individual men, it's also about policy levers, particularly parental leave. It's also about giving men the skills through training programs, and it's also about how do we scale this up through institutions, through corporations, and through government, especially the education and the health sector. As we think about our work, and there is more focus on women's economic empowerment today than ever before, I'm thrilled to know about the work that OECD is doing, and we are delighted and honoured to be part of a partnership with you. Much of the work today has focused on important areas around how do we enable women to access the workplace? How do we enable unpaid work to be valued more? Critically important, but we do much less on saying, how do we redistribute care between men and women? Have we given up hope that men can change? Do we believe that 75 years is okay to wait? Do we believe that men won't do the work? We need to have more faith and belief that it is possible to shift these norms, that it is possible to engage men. We have a sustainable development goal, an important one, around unpaid care, but we don't have a global goal on men's greater use of unpaid care. We don't have a global goal on redistributing care work between men and women. Much of our work tends to focus more, as I say, on the important levers around women's economic empowerment, but excludes often the critically important and transformational role that redistributing care work between men and women can play. It is possible to change this quickly. It is possible for it to be done over short periods of time. So do we believe that we can get to 50% men's caregiving? I hope that you do. I hope you will join us in this movement to change the world, to change the way that caregiving is distributed, and to engage men and male caregivers together with women and together with all of us so that we can all enjoy the benefits that that will bring to our societies, to our families, to our institutions, and to our world more globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you, both of you, for fleshing out the issue of gender norms and showing us things that work. I'm now turning to you. We have a few minutes left for questions and remarks. And I have here a first question by somebody in the second rank, Mario. Our colleagues will come with some mics.
Thank you very much for your very, very interesting intervention. And it matters also the place in which they have been made. I mean, in the auditorium, where we usually have meetings with ambassadors of the OECD or meeting with the bureaucrats of the OECD. And as their words resonate in this room, whilst you were speaking, I was obliged to make a comparison between the two types of discourses, and therefore to think a little bit further about those. We do not only analyze phenomena that can be translated in very rational terms, like numbers and other things. Sometimes we also address a problem that comes from behavior that are difficult to be understood. What is the general mechanism of our discussion? Is to say, okay, there is a problem. Our role is, by means of evidences, to show that is there and what it means, and then to discuss rationally about the solution, that the majority of the time are policy actions. A slight variation of this sequence is there is a problem, we show it in rational terms, we discuss, and then we promote advocacy, getting together voices of people that are all persuaded in the same way, so that the strength of our voice can affect, impact the author of the problem at the origin. If I was particularly interested by, in particular, Poonam's presentation, because it seems to me that you are exploring outside the box. You are going in a more complicated territory. There are institutions that are social, are rooted, not necessarily are rational, or at least are rational, but not accordingly with the rationality that we usually adopt. Is it enough to show that they exist, to have them changing? Or do we need new tools to speak with people that are deeply rooted in those values, in that culture, and as such may be, in a certain sense, a little bit incapable to interpret or to see the traditional communication messages that we send around? Let me do, just for simplicity, an example. We are discussing in those days, for obvious reason, a lot about populism. And our translation of populism is people continue to behave strangely in a different way than the one that we suggest to follow. Therefore, what should we do? Explain ourselves better, which means repeating 3 times the same speech we have already done. Sometimes you have the feeling that there is a blockage, there is a mechanism that does the populism or populist attitude simply do not listen to the style of argumentation that we traditionally put in place. That the way to reach the mind of people is maybe different. I open a parenthesis. Sometimes is that our theory are weak and bad. It's not that the populists think badly. Sometimes it's we that we have to redo our job on our box of tools. But sometimes, let's say, we should try to persuade in a different way. Now, I come from a country which is Italy, where at a certain point we have a gentleman that was called Berlusconi, that is still there actually, and he controlled private television and public television as being not the owner of the private, which he is, but prime minister. And by means of a certain change in television, that's my thesis, it changed also the mentality of people. Therefore, here we have an object, obscure object of desire, which is the media and the mechanism in which they function, the narrative, and the way in which the narrative speaks with people, that become almost an autonomous object of work, analysis, and use. Now, you have done it, it seems to me. You have exactly realized that the appropriate way to speak was not to produce 3 regression, 4 graphs, going to see people and say, read this paper, and if you don't know how to read, we will repeat it 3 times. But you have tried to adjust the narrative, the language, the speech, in order to take into account those crucial dimensions, which are maybe symbolic, not rational in the way we see them, but not nevertheless particularly crucial and important. They play on identification, they play on symbolism, they play on empathy, they play on many things that usually we think are the evil, because only the cold rationality can help coming out from hell. So the point is, if you can try to draw more general lessons from your experience that do not apply only to empowering women, but may apply to many other fields, the awful fascism that we see coming back after having left the Second World War, where everybody said no more. So if you have lessons for us, I think they will be extremely helpful, because it seems to me, we are not making it. Thank you.
Thank you for asking a small question. And then I think the lady in the back wanted to have the mic as well. Là, et après là.
Good afternoon. Thank you both very much. I'm actually very, like many people in the room, very passionate about gender equality and very much inspired by the work of both Promundo and the foundation. So thank you for that. I have a very simple question, if I may. I would like to pose to Mr. Tim Shand regarding your, I'm actually, the work in context of the MENA region. I have actually read the report of the images study that was published last year in context of the MENA region, and I was just wondering, I know it's a somewhat broad question, but what is, I mean, more specifically, there's a particular statistic that you highlight in your report, namely that 20%, if I'm not mistaken, or 25%, 1/4 of the people that were surveyed in your large survey in context of a large number of MENA countries are, gender sensitive and like believers and advocates, strong advocates of gender equality and the empowerment of women. And so my question to you is, how much potential, I mean, I'm writing a policy paper right now to support the work of the Gates Foundation with regard in context of the MENA region, and how, the idea of what they're wanting me to do is essentially to establish, build a positive dialogue to highlight all the considerable progress that has been made by MENA countries in order to empower women, so to speak. And obviously the images study comes to play. And it is, 25%, I think it was 1/4. To what extent, I'm personally from the Middle East, but to what extent do you think this is, I don't know, is this a relatively good statistic? Is there potential for change from within the MENA region, So, can you tell us a little about that, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Madame.
Hi, my name is Elaine Konkevich. I had the honor of being on the panel this morning. I come from UN Women, working in Central Asia. And I wanted to highlight a couple points, and then with a question. One of the points I was raising this morning, and I appreciate very much, Poonam, for this coming out in your approach, is that when we speak about gender equality, we will only be effective when we make it personal. Which I've seen in your, let's say, it's called an innovative approach, but it's actually an approach that we should have thought a long time ago, basically, until the people being affected actually see something real in their own lives and how it impacts them. And this is what we see also in the Me Too movement, why it has been had such a high impact, because it's actual people coming out and saying how they personally have been affected. So that is very, very good. And the connection I wanted to make is with the Men Care program. I'm not sure which countries you are working in, and I would like to know for both, in the case of the example in India, and then with your example, you mentioned your financing from DFID, so obviously this wouldn't be possible without the financing to be able to invest in such a program that you could have such a broad outreach. So my question to both of you is, what would you think, what needs to happen in order to multiply these messages really as broadly as possible? Because I really think until we can have a really big wave of change in these perceptions and stereotypes, we won't make the change that we really want to have occur across the world. So I'd appreciate your comments on how to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I see one more hand at the back over there.
I'm Ashley Acker. I'm statistician here at the International Transport Forum. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to both of you, because your presentations were incredible. These are such innovative ideas, and I think you're really getting to the core of what our equity problems are about and the solutions we need to address those. I just have one quick specific question about the example in India. with the relationship with the abusive husband, I think it was a very powerful message for male viewers to see how they can change from violent patterns, but I was a little worried about female viewers who watching it might fall into this the cycle, which is common in abusive relationships, of believing that the partner will change eventually in a certain condition. And I was just curious if that was something that was discussed during the plot, or if there's other plots in that show that discuss that issue from the female side as well, and the challenge of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, who shall go first? Tim, would you like to take the floor first?
Great. Well, thank you for those very thoughtful questions and reflections. Let me kind of take them in order. Start with Mario's point. I mean, so I think there's a lot we can learn from innovative approaches, and I think, you know, Poonam's work in terms of its global reach, I think in particular, and I think that work must continue to be supported and strengthened. But I do think there's an important question around political will that I'd like to put back on the table. And I say political will with a small p, that for our work, do we believe that it is possible to redistribute unpaid care? Does OECD believe that it's possible to redistribute unpaid care? Much of your work in OECD is focused on important levers around this issue, but is not focused necessarily particularly strongly on what I'm talking about. And I think there's more that could be done on this issue. I think there's more that can be done to think about a different world that is possible, where we don't just ensure that unpaid work is sufficiently valued, as has been mentioned, or we look at the ways in which we redistribute unpaid care work between women and the state, but we also think about how do we get men to do more. And so I would put the question back to you. How are you reflecting this within your work when you have policy dialogues with ambassadors and others? And I think that's a really important space. We've had a lot of success engaging with governments, and, you know, particularly the Icelandic government that tends to export gender equality has created spaces for us to engage with different governments and policymakers and people in positions of decision making to have these conversations. And I think that's an important space. But I think, how are we reflecting this work broadly across what we do? And I'll say again, no single country in this world, and that relates a little bit to your question, Elena, no single country has a commitment to men doing 50% of unpaid care work. No single country has an action plan for men to do more around this issue. No single country has particular levers and indicators. We have a Sustainable Development Goal 5.4 on unpaid care work. Do we have a target on men doing more? We don't. And so I think part of it is about how do we accelerate in-country action? How do we accelerate work around parental leave, which I know you're doing? But how do we get governments to do more on this issue? And I think, you know, linking Mario and your question, Elena, for me, I think that is a key thing that we need to do. We need in-country action on this issue. We need governments and corporations to do more on it. We might make it sound like our men care work is particularly well funded. We actually don't have any direct funding for the work that we do with men care. It's a more organic thing of networks and organizations around the world doing activities, and we support them. But this transformational agenda does require financial support, and it does require broader commitment. And, you know, we're certainly speaking to donors about that, and, you know, we're really grateful to UNFPA. Sorry, I don't know if you said UNFPA or UN Women, Elena, but UNFPA for the support that you've provided to our work more broadly. But yeah, I think it's about, my point really is, it's about new innovative solutions, but it's also about making sure that we're committed more broadly to this work and have the political will. And let me just say, I think it's also about recognizing that there's a moment where something's up with masculinities, and this links a little bit to the question around the Middle East point, that there's something going on around men's social isolation, the backlash that we're seeing around the Me Too moment for many men, the high levels of male unemployment We certainly saw that in the Middle East. We can add on to that if you look at countries like the US, where I'm based, men's high use of drugs and the opioid epidemic, high levels of suicide ideation amongst men. There's something up that we call in the office around a crisis of masculinities, that men are seeking for a particular identity in a new and different world. The world has changed. Many men have not. We see consistently through research that we did something called the man box, where men who are more likely to be in the box of traditional masculinities are not only more likely to commit and to experience violence, are actually more likely to have suicide ideation, mental health issues, and more likely, as we were discussing at lunch, to be involved in sexual harassment and assault. So there's something about how do we enable men to be different in this space? How do we enable men to recognize a changed world where women, thankfully, are holding them to account? How do we get men to stop and ask women for directions? And how do we think about what it means to be a new man in this space? And that in the Middle East is a particular challenge. We saw one key difference in the Middle East, and we did the study in Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco, and Palestine, that in every country around the world, young people and young men had shown more equitable ideals or more equitable beliefs than their older counterparts. That was the opposite in the Middle East. There's something going on in the Middle East around what it means to be a young man, what it means to be a man there, particularly given the context, which is challenging and problematic. And I think one thing that we also see is, yes, there's a reasonable proportion of men who will say we support gender equality in the abstract. But then when you say more specifically, well, what about women's leadership? What about women's access to political decision-making? What about women's access to jobs? Men will say, well, yes, I believe in women's economic empowerment, but if there's a choice to be made between me getting a job and her getting a job, it should be about me getting a job, when the chips are down. And so I really think, again, it's about how do we imagine a different form of masculinities? How do we break the mold that a man needs to be a provider and a protector, and that we can all play different kind of roles? One of the key entry points in the Middle East was men's involvement in fathers and caregiving. And we consistently saw in the Middle East men wanting to be more involved in the lives of their children, and would, happy to, great that you've seen the report and thank you. But I think there is definitely important work to do in that context, and to think about how we kind of hold men to account for their, high levels of sexual harassment, high levels of kind of gender-based violence, supportive attitudes, and violence against women, but at the same time create new models of what it means to live in a more equitable and non-violent relationship and household and society. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to make an attempt, Mario, to answer your question, but I must say you could be a great commentator because you really cracked it. You know exactly what we are up to. But and thank you for your insights. Greatly appreciate, and I felt appreciated because you've really gone into some of the strategies we have used, and you've articulated them. So I want to start with answering a question by saying that I was at a Gates Foundation meeting on social and behavior norms change 2 weeks ago. And it was really with the evaluation community. It wasn't presenting projects. I went as a learner to learn from the evaluations that they have done or they have supported, and the academic community was there. The headlines from that meeting was, it's very difficult to change behaviors, and gender norms are even more difficult to change. So what we're dealing with is a very difficult issue to change. But having said that, if you learn from other people, there is huge success in pockets across the world. I mentioned Mexico, Nigeria, and South Africa, and Brazil. There's also Nicaragua and some very interesting program with men and young men in Nigeria, as you would have heard. So learn, we always in the development sector try and reinvent the wheel. So I'm glad you asked the question on what are the lessons and what are the new tools. What we learned was that while shaping policy, laws, changing laws are necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition. And I think the sooner the world recognizes that we have to change social norms for people to have the courage for individual behavior to change, the better it'll be for us to go on a fast track of change. People's aspirations have changed in the world over today because they have greater access to media, television, communication, internet. And no more are their aspirations just to be a little less poor. So if you're going to try and change behavior, or for women to have little less violence, no, they want much more. They want much more, so you have to understand people's aspirations and make your programs accordingly. People don't want to see a very poor person become less poor or go to a poor health facility and get the health care. Women have also, one of the success of Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, I would say first, it's the fact that men are engaging, men are watching, and we've shown great role models and transformative men. But also the fact that women's aspirations have changed and people are more ready for a change today. It's a success of those women rather than our program only. We've played a small catalytic role. I salute the women who saw it, and men, and wanted to change. Second, the solutions, as I said, have to be very simple, and every problem has to have a solution. And some of them are very difficult problems, so how do you deal with them, like age at marriage? We see it as a solution, the community sees it as a problem. So they get their daughters married, so we have to show the solutions to them, and the solution in the Indian context and many contexts in developing countries lie with the men, because the men are the gatekeepers of their daughters, whether they go to school, how long they go to school, and till when. So working with, I can't say anything more and add to what Tim has been saying, but our mantra, we really believe you have to engage men. In fact, our slogan is, India will only change when the men change, and we do it in a positive way. We don't do male bashing. We try all kinds of tricks. For instance, we have not only role models, but we are giving 3 days in the next season, 3 days leave to men to get vasectomy. Men, only less than 1% of men in India get sterilized through vasectomy. It is only 99% is women. So you have to try everything in the bag of tricks, and I'm sure you'll have better solutions for us, but this is something along with paternity leave. India just introduced maternity leave, and we, of course, are working on trying to do a policy change where we have protested why we don't have paternity leave, and I hope you will work and shame and name India in your future work, because our current political dispensation doesn't like to be shamed globally. They don't care about being shamed nationally, but globally they don't like to be shamed. So I hope you and others at OECD will work on that seriously as a good strategy and a tool. Finally, in terms of, we have done lessons, we have written a whole case study, we've done an analysis of what works and what will not work, which I'll be very happy to share with you. But every solution, every problem has to have a solution. You cannot raise a problem today. For instance, violence. We have done enough to death talking about violence. We cannot stop at that, we have to have ending of violence as our new slogan and the whatever it takes. So we've launched a program actually called Enough is Enough in India about a year ago. And the other trick we use is celebrities. There is enough data from advertising agencies, and they're not going to waste $1, which many of us may waste. The corporate sector is not going to waste money on advertising through celebrities. The world does it, but in India, all advertisements are only through celebrities. So we have started advertising. We have to end violence using celebrities. Today, 25 of India's leading celebrities have joined us on ending violence. And even मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ, apart from getting a celebrity director, we have Sutradhar, what is the English, commentator at the end. We have one of the most popular Indian film actor. He's a director, he's a singer. He also runs an NGO who sums up. From season 2 we started this, and since I didn't present season 2 very much, he gives a summary and suggests, and people worship and follow him. In fact, IVRS peaked like that when he came, the day he came into our show in season 2. So we're using celebrities not only in the way in terms of new tools. Celebrities is our new tool, not as goodwill ambassadors, but they're out there demonstrating change, asking for change, advertising for ending violence and other issues. Finally, to answer your question, yes, it's a small part reforming this young man, Purab, into a man who doesn't beat, but it was his wife anymore, but it was related to drinking. We first had to get him off alcohol, which is a huge signal to many men. But that's only a small part of the serial. What we have is a lot of, you must have seen those women slogans together, collective action by women. Violence, ending violence is something that individual women find it very difficult. So you have to have collectives of women fighting violence. So we've done a lot of mobilizing, and this is based on real life stories again. Women have got together and fought as a group violence, individual violence. It's very difficult for a woman even physically to be able to handle a man or a woman beating them. So we have Women's Agency. In fact, we are going to be working with the World Bank and self-help groups across India. World Bank has invested in a lot of self-help groups. So there is enough data now to show that women didn't get empowered fully by their getting some thrift, some bank balance, or economic empowerment. So we're going to introduce the violence, ending violence, and मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ in different ways with the women in self-help groups so that they get sexual, reproductive health and violence. And collective action is very important on issues, not just of violence, but care. Collective action by women and men, both. Relationship, with the husband and the lack of communication is at the heart of some of the problem. Men and women not engaging with each other. Men and women not having conversations. Family planning, you'll find global data which shows that it's the lack of communication between husband and wives. That's why you have this huge unmet need. On your slide, you had FP 2020. It is reaching out to 120 million who have an unmet need for family planning. Part of the unmet need for family planning is not that the man wants his wife to keep having abortions and get pregnant. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of absence of conversation. I will stop there. I saw the mic go up.
Thank you very much, Poonam. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for being part of the policy dialogue on women's economic empowerment on behalf of the OECD. We'll be in touch, obviously. We'll be spreading the word about your successes, and we count on you to remain engaged also in our activities. You'll hear from us for sure, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the team of DCD and DEV for organizing today's talk.